So I will, with this sort of background, I will give first some general views, what came to mind regarding some positive parts where art can communicate sort of with people across cultures. But then I will give, since I studied philosophy and I'm a political columnist in the papers in Serbia, and my job is sort of to make fun of people and to be, you know, like George Orwell, sort of critical all the times. So my other approach will be sort of questioning how much art can really bring people together. So I view the world as one place that we all share, and this was sort of natural for me because I lived all over the world. I studied at Columbia University. Now I mostly live in Belgrade. I'm between New York, Belgrade, and I come to Berlin basically every other month. I worked on a project the last year and a half. Sort of the most successful video I made is called The Thinker in the Supermarket. And this video explores the idea of packaging. So it talks about packaging of potato chips, because I wondered why there is half of air and half of chips. It explores ketchup, because you don't really know whether it's ketchup inside, but it says it's ketchup, and there's some formulas listed on the label. So you have to trust the company that it is ketchup, but you don't know whether it is ketchup. So after that, the film explores African slaves, because they were packaged on slave ships and sent across to the States. And there was a system of packaging. You can see that on the cover of Bob Marley's Survivor, his album. So, and I learned it because of Bob Marley. So there you have some sort of cultural exchange. And the film ends with packaging of people in their workspaces, in their apartments, and, you know, in urban spaces, and eventually with packaging of nature. Then I made a video game with my group of programmers, and the video game deals with a factory where children workers build toys. And your job as the gamer is to hit the children so they work harder. And the paradox is that the video game is played on a smartphone, and the smartphone was built somewhere in China by people who live in and work in awful living conditions, or anywhere in the world. So that's important, because I wanted to tie to make a connection between the moment a mother buys a toy for her child and the moment when someone else across the world actually built the toy. There is something very wrong with a system that requires that type of slave labor in order to function. I just wanted to point that out. So I will now give some examples of, this was sort of an overview of what I did in the last year and a half. Now I will give some examples of what came to mind when when the email mentioned cultural exchange. I realized that Bob Dylan, Jacques Brel, and Vladimir Vysotsky all lived sort of at the same time, and they are amazing sort of bards, musicians, yet they're completely different. They come from their own countries and have their own authentic voices. Then I thought of Bob Marley and Fela Kuti. So they are also examples of two completely different stage performers, two different types of music, two different countries, but fighting for the same cause of African liberation. Then I thought of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she has the famous TED Talk that was featured in the Beyoncé video on her new album. And Ms. Adichie, she talks about representing people who were misrepresented in books. So this is very important, because she gives a voice to African women. A voice they never heard, because the stories about Africans were only written by Western authors. And speaking of that cultural exchange, now she's in a Beyoncé video. Another example is 12 Years a Slave. So the film is very successful this year, and because of the film, you start pronouncing sort of with ease the names of Lupita Nyong'o and Chiwetel Ejiofor. So this sort of becomes the new norm. They are now relevant in the world media. This was never unheard of before. Steve McQueen, I mean, his parents come from the Caribbean. He's a Brit. Another example that I would like to mention is from Brazilian cinema. The film is called How Tasty is My Little Frenchman? And it's about a Brazilian tribe that eats a Frenchman. And it's a wonderful film, and you should see it. And that is cultural exchange, cannibalism as well. About all of these issues of how one culture perceives the other, probably the strongest reference is Edward Said, of course, and his idea of Orientalism. And when you read about that, things become more complicated, because sometimes cultures project an image of themselves that the Westerner or the more powerful culture wants them to see. And it goes on a loop, and it affects the culture that's projecting the image. Now, for the first time, someone can say that he is, as a director, he or she is influenced by Andrei Tarkovsky from Russia, by Pichapung from Thailand, Jia Zhanghe from China, Aki Kaurismäki from Finland. Someone can list all of these directors and count them equally. This is very important because this means that a director from Finland has as much relevance culturally as a director from the United States. And this is also important for underdeveloped countries because the artist will be the first one who will say, I have an idea which is equally good and equally relevant globally as you do, regardless of the fact that you're coming from a more developed country with richer history or whatever. So the last example of sort of the positive effects of art is at the Berlinale. I was selected for the Berlinale Talents, and we were taught about co-production. So whenever you make a work of cinema these days, you have to cooperate with other countries. So you would build these teams, and again, artists seem to be the first ones, for instance, in ex-Yugoslavia, where I come from, to trace the path to reconciliation. Now, on the other hand, here comes sort of the more critical part. The artist can only speak to an individual. So there is no way that any work of art can have any serious political effect. A work of journalism or filmic journalism could have some effect, although mostly minor, but a work of art only speaks to an individual. For instance, at the moment, I'm reading a translation of Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf. It's a completely individualistic approach. So you sit with the book can be very famous, and it was famous amongst a whole generation of people. But to really move you, to really touch you, only a few people are moved by a work of art. For this reason, art is elitist. It's not elitist in an economic sense, but it's elitist because it's deeply individual and at the same time universal. So in a way, as Oscar Wilde thought, art is above daily matters. Art has no sort of utility, right? And in that way, Shakespeare is immortal, and rulers and politicians, they'll come and go, but Shakespeare stays. So first, I want to clarify the word artist. I think the word artist doesn't have any meaning anymore today. Most of the art that is represented in galleries has no vision, has no intrinsic worth. The word artist, just as the word genius has been thrown around these days, and sort of to be frank, in my profession, and I think that's the case in any profession, only a very small percentage of people are doing any good. Most people involved in this so-called art are completely useless and have absolutely nothing to say. And this is important because these type of people seek funding. And if they have the right connection, they will get funding, and then they can, get co-productions, work on this sort of intercultural exchange or whatever, but they're not really making anything of quality. We should be also cautious of the power of this thing we call art. Our daily lives come before art, so at gatherings like these, we should know the limits of art in the actual political sphere. As far as poverty, wars, climate change, and a plethora of other burning issues are concerned, art cannot do much. Art should not do much. Journalism or activism are better at that. Plato was aware that art could be used for propaganda, but then that in a way ceases to be art. Art, as Oscar Wilde pointed out, has no daily banal utility. Art is not a means to some agenda. When it does happen to have a social effect, like Marley's music or the film 12 Years a Slave, that is, so to speak, an external consequence, it is still only self-contained in its beauty, and the consequence comes later. So the art is not made for a political effect. Art can influence discourse, just as Steve McQueen's film did. Art does not influence daily events. And this is an important distinction. Only good art can influence discourse in a meaningful way. All other constructed cultural programs funded by commissions, backed by elaborate international funds that have many requirements with agendas that come down to meetings where a folk choir sings some sort of national song and ambassadors gather around to drink wine, this is not cultural exchange. This is perhaps even worse than if there was no exchange, because it is a bastardization of the traditional art that is rooted in important values we have forgotten. Art used for political purposes is worse than no art. I would rather live in a country without art than in a country with artistic propaganda. Art has to be, as Theodor Adorno used to repeat, a negation. It has to negate the status quo. It has to be in a dialectical relation to reality. I simply want to say that Picasso's Guernica has influenced the way we perceive war, and it has pointed out our savageness, but it did not stop rich men to send other people to go to war for false ideas. Picasso can't do that. Today, in a time of the NSA, internet spying, and the dubious status of national sovereignty, and the continuous rule of capital in all domains of life, diplomacy through art cannot really contribute to burning political issues. Art can reflect on the crisis we are living in, and that's what I am trying to do. It can examine, explore, but it is not a part of a bureaucratic system. No true creator is a bureaucrat, and no bureaucracy can create art, regardless of funding and good intentions. I am saying this because nowadays, most of cinema is funded by national governments, and most of it is crap. And one of the people who likes to point that out often is Werner Herzog, and he basically quits watching movies. He only makes his own. Now, what should we do with the artist who actually wants to contribute to solving real-world problems? And this is sort of a different issue. So what I'm saying is, a work of art is not a political tool. That's it. Now, an artist can be politically involved, but that's separate from, he just happens to be an artist. And as I said, the word artist has no meaning, but I'm using it just because I don't have another word. So the artist is simply someone who has a set of skills that some other people might not have. That's it. Just as a doctor has a set of skills that I do not have. And this varies greatly between artists because, as I said, 95% of artists don't do good work. I wrote once in an article in Politica in a Serbian newspaper, I suggested that artists could be employed in the education system, in art classes, to foster creativity in children as reflected in the ideas of Sir Ken Robinson, whom you might know from the TED Talks. It is truly useful for a society to have creative people and people in touch with their emotions. And art can really help with that. there it actually can be used. Many artists are patient, have remained playful children at heart, and like to work with children. Reformation of the children's education is something that interests me, and I believe it could solve many of our problems, and artists globally could be a huge part of the solution. But this is someone who happens to do art, so the individual, because we're all political animals, as Aristotle said. Now, another issue I am interested in is climate change. So let me repeat, I am now talking about the artist as a person living in society. The artist can be involved in matter of society, but art cannot. Or at least that is not the primary goal of art, otherwise it's propaganda. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is a perfect work of art, completely independent from its use as a European Union anthem. Although its use influences our reception of the work, and we cannot anymore perceive it in its beauty because it was used for a bureaucratic goal. So back to climate change, and I'm finishing with this. I, as a citizen of the world, who happens to be a filmmaker, am concerned with climate change. Laurie Anderson, for instance, the visual artist and widow of the famed rock and roll musician Lou Reed, was an artist in residence at NASA. That didn't really work out, but it was a wonderful idea. Laurie is an example of someone who uses technology, experiments, and innovates. I try to work in all kinds of media and engage with issues that require computer, engineering, biological, architectural knowledge. As a film director, I work with teams. So I'm willing to contribute, to give ideas, to communicate, to work on concrete problems with scientists, activists, and regular people. Now, my work each day deals with beauty and its presence in our world. I am ready to work so that beauty, as Dostoevsky wrote, could save the world. I think that today the artist, just as any other human being, should serve other people. So in a way, the moment you have self-interest that trumps the collective interest, which also happens with most artists, with most politicians, with most bureaucrats, generally with most people, and especially if they have power, that is dangerous. So I sort of advocate a different mindset of serving people. And our goal as citizens, but especially myself as someone who pretends to be an artist, is to make people around you happy and to leave a planet that will be a joyous playground for our children. But I'm afraid that talking about it won't do much help, and people should actually solve problems. And I don't think that, singing folk music to others and paying for these visits and so on actually does that. People should sort of wholeheartedly work at that, but I guess the world isn't organized that way, right? Thanks.
You, please.
I should say, okay.
Some questions, we don't let you go like this. So my first comment and concern is about art not changing anything. You mentioned the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven. Of course, what is done, taking it as a hymn for Europe, that's nonsense. But it changed at the time where it was written quite a lot, because it gave the expression to the words of Schiller of a whole political situation. And so did Verdi by his opera Nabucco. So art could change the world. Why does it no longer give those impulses? And it is not true in our time. Without Woodstock, without hair, you would not have had certain developments. So art perfectly can change the world.
I started doing art because I sort of had that mindset. But the thing is that this isn't, I'll give an example of Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian philosopher. So when you look at sort of nationalistic movements, somehow it happens that poets are the one very involved in nationalistic movements. And that's why I mentioned Plato, because Plato had some sort of right idea, but when he said that the poets should be expelled from society. And he was not completely wrong. I write poetry, so Pasolini is my role model, and he wrote poetry, and he was a Marxist and Christian and homosexual, very complicated. But the thing is, I don't think that this is actually, when you write a symphony, let's say, you do not write it with a goal in mind, right? With an agenda. You create art.
Beethoven had the goal to write the words. It was unique at that time for symphony, to have a choir at the end and to have words. So that was his deliberate decision.
But that's only within art. It has no, there's no like Ministry of Culture of a republic saying to him, you should write this or whatever. It came from within. So what I'm saying is art with an agenda, with some goal in mind, art that is not pure is questionable. What I mentioned, and that's why I mentioned the film 12 Years a Slave, is that sometimes very good art, but only the highest quality, and that's very rare, and the Woodstock is a completely, a more complicated issue, and Adorno, whom I mentioned, wrote about it, because it's dubious to which extent it actually helped. Like, I love Jimi Hendrix, but it's questionable whether that actually moved along political matters, or whether it is that kids at that time were afraid, didn't want to go to war because there was draft. Now there's no draft. People don't care. Only the poor kids who have to get scholarships to go to college, they go to war. I don't think George Bush would send his kids to go to Iraq. But the thing is, with art, the highest art, and you mentioned, so all the great German poets, the heights of German culture, when it is done in that way, when it's in its highest form, then it can have an effect because it affects discourse and enters the collective consciousness. But it is not made with an agenda. That's why I mentioned Oscar Wilde, who sort of says beauty, that's the ultimate goal. Everything else that happened just happened. So it's almost like you're communicating to God and you don't, but that's a small percentage, and those people are not the ones who are applying for all these funds and doing this.
Yeah, coming to the funds, we had yesterday in our debate, we had the question, is not a big difference between American filmmakers and European. American filmmakers started very early to consider it as a market. And as they have this huge language area, they had a huge market. In Europe, people are fighting, and philosophers, Bernard-Henri Lévy, is fighting for cultural exception, saying, if we do not manage to have art preserving our cultures, which are very diverse, we cannot, culture will not survive. So is there not an obligation to subsidize by nation states what has to preserve the national culture and identity and traditions?
Yeah, I think a good example is Mike Leigh, the British film director. He talked about the fund cuts in Britain. I think the states should take care of these things. The thing that I'm talking about something that people rather would not talk, and that's that a lot of people who get these funds should not get them. So what I'm basically saying that the system starts eating itself, and people this funding system becomes an end in itself. So it's not like you have Beethoven writing and someone sending him money and that's it, but you have people who have to, for instance, now when you're making a film, you need to spend like 4 or 5 years developing you have stages. So for instance, development of the script, you get money for that. Pre-production, you get money for that. Production, you get money for that. Post-production, promotion, whatever. And you spend 5 years, and I see those directors sitting in cafes and paying with that money rent in center of my city. So that's what I'm saying. I would rather sort of to have a more stringent approach to this.
You mentioned a few things that touched me directly, personally. You mentioned Jimi Hendrix.
No, I just responded to
No,
Woodstock.
yeah, so you
I
just
said,
mentioned it.
I love him, yeah.
Yeah, okay, fine, me too. You know, someone, I don't know who said it, but someone said art is higher than life. You know, we human beings are some arrogant people because we never look at things necessarily in a more universal context. Are we the only life forms out here in the universe? Could it be that there are other intelligent life forms? Could it be that they have art? Could that be? Yeah. I'm just saying, you know, so if one would understand that, one would take that for granted, then perhaps one might have another view or have another perspective in terms of dealing with the questions you're talking about. Beethoven, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he also compose the War of 1812? Wasn't that him?
Yeah, he composed for Napoleon.
Oh, okay, all right. So here we have a good example. And for me, you know, art is the highest form of, don't mistake what I'm saying, the highest form of manipulation. Because you're going to cast your view on an object, and that object is going to come back at you. There's going to be a reaction. That's assuming that you have eyes to see. If you're talking about painting, it could be music. If you have ears to listen. There's so many things that one would have to assume to be able to appreciate art in the first place. So getting back to the question I raised about could there be alien art forms, then we'd have to get into the whole question of, well, how would that manifest itself? All of those different things, you know. You know, you're a brave man because you've made some statements that have, I think, agitated people, you know, and also has motivated people, including myself, to make a response. I would say that you should, in a certain sense, and I understand your position. You're a young guy. You know, I play the piano, and I'm a filmmaker, but I'm reluctant to call myself an artist. I always say, I'll let somebody else call me that because I have so much great respect for art and artists. So I don't want to be self-assuming. You know, I'll let my work establish whether or not I'm an artist or not.
I agree with
All right. Okay, so we agree on that. But art, as I said before, is a form of manipulation, clearly. And so we are trying to evoke emotion. Evoke, provoke, and challenge people. That's the whole purpose of art.
Yeah.
And we'll just one more thing. One more thing. I don't want to give a lecture here, but one more thing. Let's go back to the origins of art. And if we talk about people like the cave art, you know, this all had at the beginning somewhere because this planet is about 4.5 billion years old and art wasn't here at the beginning. And so if we go back to those people, what was their motivation? You know, they didn't have these lofty discussions, these intellectual, philosophical discussions. Or maybe they did, you know. But some people were hunters and gatherers and they had to go out and hunt while he was in there or he or she was painting on the wall, taking the time to do the paintings or whatever, had the idea to come up with that in the beginning. But it has its origins, and we got to flow from there.
But can I respond? I'm not sure where the difference is. For instance, the cave people, what I'm advocating, let's do that. They painted to talk to the spirits. They didn't talk to the Ministry of Culture and ask for money so they can talk to the spirits. That's what I'm saying.
But they did ask the compatriots for the time to do it, or they had the understanding for them to do that. There was some discussion here because while he's hunting, he had to eat and somebody had to feed him.
It was a spiritual thing. Today it's a much more bureaucratic thing. That's all I'm saying. I'm just critical of that because I want people to be, we mentioned these musicians, more like...
So I have one comment and one concern. When you say art is elitist, and you mentioned Steppenwolf, so you deny ordinary people who are not scholars to read.
I immediately qualified the statement by saying that not elitist in any way that is sort of implies class or anything like that. It's elitist in the sense that when you take one work of art, and this is an idea, it's not my idea, it's Andrei Tarkovsky's idea. Yeah. When you take a work of art, only a few will actually, a few meaning everyone who watches a film, only a few will truly be moved by it.
That is the arrogance against ordinary people.
No, because...
who are fully understanding good and quality of art and making the difference.
No, I'm not
saying... So the elitist speech on art is not giving the right to ordinary people to have their feeling and their way of approach.
I am trying to say that you have many different works of art, and we are all different people. So you see a work of art that is there is no sort of objectives, high quality. So you see a work of art, and I won't be able to appreciate it. Only you and few others, I won't be moved by it because I have a different life experience. It has nothing to do with class, with hierarchy, with knowledge, with any of that. I'm just saying that when I listen to a story about a mother, someone who is a mother will understand the story better than I do. I can appreciate it and I say, oh yeah, it's good shots and all of that. It's nicely directed. But I will not truly be moved as the mother looking at the story about a mother. So in that sense, I'm saying it's elitist, meaning that every work of art is appreciated, truly appreciated by few people. Many consume art. And today, many, when you look like at YouTube, you have 10 million views of certain songs. But I doubt that 10 million people, let's say if it's a moving song, stay there and cry. They're ironing their t-shirts or whatever while they're listening to the song. So I'm saying out of the 10 million who are listening to a moving song, let's say Chopin, he has 10 million views collection of his music. I am afraid that only a few hundred are really actually truly moved. Cultural relevance or that people appreciate that happens by many, by everyone, and that is good. But a spiritual experience.
There was one question here.
Hi. I just want to say, I've been the whole week, this was like my first experience with cultural diplomacy, and I've been the whole week listening to words and a lot of emptiness and lack of meaning. And like, I was really skeptical about your talk, like really, like I was like checking my phone, sorry about that. And when you started talking, I was thinking maybe that's the whole point. Maybe just art and diplomacy don't belong together, at least diplomacy as a political act backed by a government. Maybe this is just not possible. Maybe art has to be free to be art.
I had the luck to talk to Agnes Godin, and she is the director of photography of Claire Denis, and thank you for your question. And I talked with her, and it was wonderful. We talked, when I meet these people who are important artists, I don't talk to them about business or anything like that. I talk to her about life and love and so on. And what she said is, I don't think there are artists in cinema. She went that far. So she said, Francis Bacon, maybe. Leonardo da Vinci, he didn't say about himself, oh, I'm an artist. He went and did that because he had a spiritual need, an inner need. It's a biological need. So I'm saying it's something real. And there's no lofty organizations, there's no agendas, nothing like that. You make it because you have to make it. There's no other choice. That's why I said it's sort of elitist, and the words here are problematic because artist has no meaning, elitist has meanings today that it shouldn't have, and I'm sort of on the far left, so I'm egalitarian to the maximum. I'm almost anarchist in those views, so I do not think artist is in that sense elitist. What I'm saying, it's not like every person that is walking down the street has this spiritual need to speak to God or whatever. So in that sense, it's a few. You have Beethoven. You don't have 15 Beethovens. And in that, what you said, I mean, there are people whom, and I am all for that, Bob Marley. I grew up on Bob Marley's music, or Fela Kuti. I was amazed when I watched the musical Fela, which was now produced by people like Jay-Z and Will Smith and so on. And that is all nice, but Fela did that because he had to, and it was his voice, and there was no, you know, he didn't talk to the president of Nigeria, on the contrary. So I think, and that's why I mentioned Adorno, negation, rebellion, so you're against something, and as you rightly pointed out, it manipulates emotions, but that's why it so easily becomes propaganda. When I studied Eisenstein, the film director, I'm not sure whether that's art or propaganda. And it's so easy, but when people make art from a pure place, then it's not anymore manipulation, it's communication, it's something different. So that's, I sort of feel that I'm meeting too many people who have too much self-interest, and maybe this is a reaction to that. I don't like people who think about themselves more than they think about others.
So last question.
Hello, so I want to ask you, which opinion do you have about some pieces of art that when are seen by people, they have different reactions about it? I really agree with you that only a few chosen one are going to truly understand it. But if there are a few groups of chosen one and each of them have a different opinion of this piece, they have maybe different feelings or different understanding. This is because this piece of art is not good enough, or maybe it's not well done enough to give the same feelings to everyone. Which opinion do you have about this? Yeah, about this different feeling of the same thing.
I actually think that good works of art provoke different opinions. So we would watch the same film, and you would say, I think this, and I would say, no, I think this. But the work is good if we are truly provoked as sort of individuals. So I don't think that's a bad thing. And in that sense, it's also sort of, art is individualistic in that way. And we'll have different responses, and I think that is fine. But we will both, in a way, enjoy it, and that's the beauty of it.
So we are running out of time, so I thank you very much, and we wish you very good luck in the Berlinale.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.